The hardtail versus full suspension debate is predominantly in the cross-country and trail market. If you're looking for a downhill or enduro bike, you're almost exclusively going to be looking at a full suspension bike because, on balance, they're probably a little bit faster. When it comes to cross-country and trail bikes, however, there are some very enticing options, both in terms of hardtails and full suspension. Today, we're going to talk about the differences between the two different types of bike within a trail application. And thanks to our sponsors Identiti, we've got a metal full suspension bike and an AKA hardtail. Later on, I'm going to take both of these bikes for a little ride to see how they feel when riding them. However, before that, let's talk about some of the fundamental differences between full suspension bikes and hardtails. The most fundamental difference between the two, obviously, is that a full suspension bike has suspension for the front and rear wheel, whereas a hardtail has it for the front, not the rear. Firstly, I'm going to advocate for the full suspension trail bike because this is a bike that you're most likely to see at your local trails. So the reason behind having a full suspension bike isn't really for comfort, although it does help with that. As the bike travels over rough ground, obviously the wheels move up and down, conforming to the trail over roots and rocks. So the suspension is there to remove those forces from both the pedals and the handlebars, and this means that you get a smoother ride. Keeping your tyres in contact with the ground means better steering, better traction, and ultimately better braking, and this leads to better control. If you have better control, you can therefore go faster or ride safer. So the hardtail then doesn't have this rear suspension helping keep the rear wheel in contact with the ground, and this therefore means that there's less control and more bumpiness on rougher terrain. On a smooth trail, the benefit of a hardtail though is that because there's no rear suspension to compress when you're moving your weight through the bike, so it's really easy to pump the bike and generate extra speed. On less technical terrain and easier trails, you therefore get a slightly more involving ride on a hardtail because there's less isolation from the trail. Therefore, if you are thinking about the differences between them, maybe start with thinking what kind of trails you're going to be riding with your trail bike. Smoother, less gnarly stuff? You could think about hardtails, but if you really want to hit the rough stuff, let's think again about that full suspension bike. So if this is going to be your first proper mountain bike, then you're probably going to be hoping to improve your skills a fair bit with this bike. Some will argue that the hardtail improves your riding faster than a full suspension because you're having to think about what the bike's going to do on the trail, and therefore you'll pick better lines through it. The counter-argument is that with that wider margin for error with the full suspension bikes, it gets you out of trouble faster, and this means you're less likely to have those little confidence knocks that can stop your progression as a rider. Ultimately, you're going mountain biking to have fun. Some people will find real enjoyment from finding the smoothest, most precise line through a trail. And at this point, you might actually enjoy the fact that the hardtail gives you that real connection to the trail. On the other hand, you might want to go really, really fast, and that might be how you get your kicks. If so, maybe full suspension is the way to go. The other thing you might want to think about is that if all your friends are on full suspension bikes and you're the only one on a hardtail, you might struggle to keep up unless you're significantly better at riding a bike than they are, and that might not be quite so much fun. In terms of looking after your bike, it's fair to say that the hardtail will be an easier proposition, and that's because there are fewer moving parts. That's also true for setup. On a hardtail, you've just got to worry about the suspension fork and getting those air pressures right. On the full suspension bike, you've got to think about the balance between the front and the rear suspension. So there's more things to worry about, more things to fiddle with. However, there are plenty of guides out there, including our very own done by Seb Stott. We've got two comparable bikes from our sponsors Identiti. We've got the Metal, which is a 160mm trail/enduro bike, and we've got the AKA, which is their trail hardtail with 140mm suspension up front. Both of them have very similar specs, so we have very similar wheels, tyres, drivetrain and suspension. Interestingly, the AKA has slightly less travel up front than the Metal does, and this is because as the fork moves through its travel, and because the rear wheel doesn't move through its travel, the bike pivots, steepening things like the head angle and seat angle as you're going down steep technical terrain. On the Metal, because both front and rear suspension compresses, this geometry stays more consistent. So generally speaking, a trail hardtail will have slightly less front suspension travel than a full suspension bike. So the main difference between them obviously is the frame, and this accounts for the roughly £1,300 price difference, this one being cheaper, and also the roughly 1.5 kilo weight difference too. And this is something that you'll generally see across most bike brands' ranges. The Hardtail will be between £800 and £1,500 cheaper, there or thereabouts, and will be roughly a kilo to a kilo and a half lighter as well. So the AKA in this spec comes in at £2,500 and the metal is £3,800. However, the debate between hardtails and full suspension really starts at about £1,000 mark. For £1,000 you can get some great full suspension bikes and some really good hardtails too. But below that I would probably argue that pound for pound, the Hardtail is going to have a far better spec. So that's the basics of the debate. Now, either of these bikes will get you down any trail. The question is, which one will be more fun? So let's go for a ride and find out. So on a smoother track, the full sus on those little sniper routes just lets you get away with them, but put some pedal strokes in, and it is a more sluggish feeling bike. But hit a jump, overshoot it, you've got a little thing that just gives you the boost to get away with it. Bit steeper now. Bit steeper into the woods, tight and twisty, not massive attraction, and some big lumps. This is where the full sus should work best. Those little steps and compressions, the suspension gives you that little bit of confidence, doesn't blow your ankles off, you can carry more speed. This is a real smooth track. And on the Hardtail, pick a smooth line and it will go really fast from here. If you're going fast enough there in these jumps, you might have to squash them or pre-jump, because if you go too deep like that, you get a real bang. Heading into the steep and rough track on the Hardtail now. Less traction from the back wheel immediately. It's getting pinged around a little bit more, and so it's braking traction, meaning not as good braking and a little bit less control. On the steps, there's nothing to suck up those bumps, so your body's getting bumped around a lot more. In this track, although it's really fun to ride on a Hardtail, the full sus is safer, faster and more composed. Still enjoying myself there. So there we have it, two different types of trail. One steep, rough, loose, rooty and rocky, and then another lot smoother with some nice berms and some little fly-off jumps. And two different but similar bikes, both aggressive trail bikes. And as you'd expect, the full suspension bike really excelled when things got lumpy, gnarly, rocky and rooty. The amount of grip and the compliance from the back end meant I felt faster, I felt safer and had a lot of fun when it got steep. And then here on this faster, smoother trails, the Hardtail really came into its own. The direct connection between the trail and the rider felt real nice. Then there's a snappiness out of the corner. It feels great when you can sprint and get that speed immediately. Finally, when you pick that right line and it goes smooth, it's an amazing feeling. So having spent a whole day jumping between hardtails and full sus on rough and smooth trails, I think the biggest defining features to which I would choose actually depends on the trail. So think about what you're going to ride most and go from there. What's certain though is that if you pick a nice bike with some good kit on there, you're guaranteed to have fun, and that is the most important thing. Do you ride a hardtail or do you ride a full sus? Let us know in the comments what you think is best. And don't forget to like and subscribe.